Today on Understanding Immigration, breaking down the border crisis with Rob Law.
The numbers are absolutely astronomical. They're at levels that we never thought you'd see before. I mean, it's become routine for over 200,000 illegal aliens to be apprehended in a month.
Coming to you from Washington, D.C., you are now listening to FAIR's Understanding Immigration Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Understanding Immigration. With me today, I have friend of FAIR, former employee, former guest on Understanding Immigration, Rob Law from the America First Policy Institute. Rob, how are you doing today?
Ron, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me, and it's great to come home again.
We're glad to have you back. Glad to have you in the studio here back at FAIR, be able to talk about all that's going on in the immigration right now. There's been so many things that have happened recently. Just this past week, we had President Biden go up. I think it was Peter Doocy from Fox News asked him a question. He said, you're going to Arizona. You're going to be 100 miles from the border. Might have even been 50 miles from the border. And Biden instantly responded. He said, there's more important things I have to do. I'm not going down. What kind of emotions does that kind of pull out of you, Rob, when you heard that happen?
Well, I mean, it's offensive, really, when it boils down to it. You have the worst humanitarian crisis at the border that we've ever seen, and it's solely because of Biden administration policies. And to not even, a token visit's not going to solve the problem, but at least show that you're taking it seriously. And maybe they should have told him that there was an ice cream truck at the border or something like that. May have made the visit, but it just goes to show that this administration has completely embraced the mindset of open borders, that there is no United States southern border. Anybody who wants to be here will be allowed in, and they don't seem to care about the trafficking that's occurring, the crimes that are being committed against American citizens who live in that area, and the pain that people are feeling across the country as illegal aliens and drugs flood into the country.
Yeah, it really is a crisis. I mean, we have so many people coming across. I think it was the latest border estimate we had from FAIR was that it was 5.5 million people across the border under the Biden administration, over 1 million of those being gotaways. And I think that's kind of the most dangerous part that we have coming across right now.
Oh, the numbers are absolutely astronomical. They're at levels that we never thought you'd see before. I mean, it's become routine for over 200,000 illegal aliens to be apprehended in a month. That never happened in the entire history of DHS. And now it's been 6-7 straight months of Biden administration. They've completely changed what it is to look like, border numbers. And you're right. It's so easy to turn yourself in and be released into the interior, which is what these economic migrants want. It's the gotaways. That's what's the real national security concern. Because if it's that easy to be let in, these guys are going to great depths to avoid any sort of detection. That's the real national security concern.
Yeah, of course. And, when we have these big waves of people coming in, you have 300, 400 people who are just kind of trying to come in one big wave. What's going on when you have mile section 1 of the border, mile section 3, we don't have border patrol over there. No one who's really able to dictate the flow of what's going on. And we have drugs coming in, we have people coming in, and it truly is a crisis. I mean, you kind of know a little bit about these drug numbers. Tell me about what's coming in, what this crisis looks like.
Well, again, it's record numbers. That basically the Biden administration is setting all the wrong records. And if you look at fentanyl in particular, that is the record-setting drug that is killing an entire generation of Americans. It is now the leading cause of death of young Americans 18 to 45. And it is all coming across the southern border.
So you're saying that's not COVID, that's not car accidents, it's fentanyl?
It's fentanyl. The precursor chemicals are manufactured in China. They send it to the Mexican cartels. The cartels press it into other pills and other powders, things of that sort, and then they're bringing it across the border. Most of the time when the Border Patrol agents are being drawn off their enforcement lines to process illegal aliens or apprehend them, and then that creates these enormous gaps and opportunities for the cartels to sneak these dangerous drugs into our communities, which is why every state is a border state, because every state in this country is being hit with the fentanyl crisis.
Yeah, it really, really is. And I'm glad that you brought in some figures with you here, where we're able to kind of get a real firsthand look as to what's going on. So one of these one-pagers you brought in, let's take a look. You want to go over this? I mean, those at home are going to be able to read it on the screen, but of course, point out some things that we need to see here.
Sure. Well, just last year alone, almost 15,000 pounds of fentanyl was caught, and that's just what was getting caught. And far more is actually getting through because, like I said, fentanyl is the number one killer of young Americans. And basically, what's being caught is enough to kill every American 7 to 10 times over, depending on how you calculate the estimated
now, is
U.S.
that yearly,
population.
Or is that what we've caught up until now?
That was just last year alone.
Wow.
Last year alone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and we're projecting that's probably going to get worse over time. Looking here, do we think there's any sort of savior in the next Congress coming up, anything like that?
Unless Congress finally holds this administration accountable, there's no end in sight for the drugs and the record number of illegal aliens. The Biden administration has shown no desire to pivot, to embrace the successful policies that the Trump administration put in place. They have no answers, they have no solutions, and frankly, they don't see this as a problem. It's a management capacity issue. It is not a national security or border integrity problem.
Yeah, I mean, look at it here. We have over a 3.4 increase in the record set in 2021, a 357 increase from when Trump was in office. That's 1.4 times the amount of people that could fit in the largest stadium in the U.S. It's just absolutely wild. This many drugs are coming across to be able to kill this many people, and we're still not taking it seriously. Now, I want to look at this other diagram that you brought here, where we're talking about just by the numbers in itself, and some of these are talking about deaths that we've had. And this is just in 2021 alone. We're looking at 70,000 deaths by fentanyl. This is a record-breaking increase, and it's going over and over and over again. And, there's different things which are coming across. I mean, we have the rainbow fentanyl, we have liquid fentanyl, and you think this is more, the cartels are learning the ways in which we're finding them, and they're finding more ways to change the system? What does that look like?
Well, the cartels are definitely getting creative, which is why they're masking it in the rainbow fentanyl. They're hiding it in children's toys, Lego packages, things that if they're trying to sneak it through a port of entry, that a CBP officer would think, oh, this is harmless, chalk, things like that. They're definitely getting creative and trying to get it through the legal ports. But when it comes to what's coming across the border in between the ports of entry, there's no telling what that looks like, how potent it is. But what we do know is that a lethal dose is about the size of a grain of sugar.
Wow. And now our Border Patrol people, when they're finding this on the border, I mean, obviously, you see a suspicious package, maybe this is something we need to take in. If they see something in the field, do they have a way in which they could sort of test to see that, this person's bringing fentanyl with them, or is it kind of just sort of a guess and check method, do you think?
So they have methods to figure it out. Likely it has to be brought back to a Border Patrol facility. Most likely they don't have any sort of testing strips on their person. So it's detained, but you don't really know what it is until you get back and figure it out.
And when they have to go back, to the facility to test this, that's taking them off the front lines and it's leaving our border more exposed, correct?
Well, you're exactly right. Every time you have to leave the border to go back to a processing center, which is what that is, whether that is because you've apprehended drugs or you've apprehended illegal aliens, that's time away from you patrolling the border, which creates the next, vulnerability for, the KSTs, the known as suspected terrorists, to come across, larger waves of economic migrants, or even worse, drugs or larger supplies to go through.
Yeah. You talk about these KSTs, and I think we already hit on this a little bit, but I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into this. What were the numbers over the past month with those?
I think it was at least 20 in the month, which is more than the entire Trump administration.
Wow!
And it was 98 last year alone. Wow. And here's what this means. That many numbers being apprehended does not mean that the Biden administration is doing a really good job at enforcing the law. What this says is that these bad actors view the southern border as the easiest way for them to get into our country. And it's only the dumb ones that are getting caught, the ones who probably don't realize that we have any amount of information about them in our databases. So they try to sneak across with all the other economic migrants, happen to get some sort of a biometric or biographic check, and then they get pinged. It's just those guys that are getting caught. But a lot of the getaways, both the known getaways and of course the unknown ones, those are the bad actors that are a real concern, and that is a national security concern, and there's no telling if and when another terrorist attack will happen. But if it does, most likely that avenue into the United States will have been across the southern border.
Yeah, and I mean, the combination of terrorists coming in, combine that with fentanyl, I mean, it's almost like it's the perfect recipe for some kind of disaster to happen.
It seems so, and of course it is highly lucrative for the cartels. So it's almost like the Biden administration has become the greatest business partner that the cartels could have ever hoped for. They're bringing in record revenue, smuggling and trafficking people, and then the drug money is just, whipped cream on that ice cream. Going back to our Biden analogy earlier.
Yeah, and I mean, you have the cartels, and then you said they're getting the fentanyl from ultimately the CCP. So I mean, Biden's almost complicit in the fact where he's somewhat funding that regime in a way with this as well.
Oh yeah, it's hard to separate the Biden administration and these policies from human trafficking and the CCP and the cartels. And it gets to a point where almost every single American gets caught up in it as as responsible for it because it's our country.
Yeah, of course. I mean, do you see any way of changing this? Any way we could kind of get Biden to figure out some way to do something other than, go get ice cream, as we were talking about?
Well, the new House of Representatives, I think they have a clear obligation to come forward with a very serious, robust border security bill that will actually, if put in place, secure the border, end human trafficking, and defeat the cartels. And I think that will show to the American people, hey, the House of Representatives hears you. The people's house, they have solutions. The Biden administration, they have excuses. And by doing that, that gives, the new majority in the House that support to then hold administration officials accountable through robust oversight hearings. And who knows what happens down the road. But it's clear, while the midterm elections were sort of a mixed bag looking at it from a political standpoint, the American people overwhelmingly say that we are heading in the wrong direction, and the border crisis is a big part of that sentiment.
Yeah, and there was actually a fair poll that was run. I believe it was an exit poll from Election Day back in November, and what we ended up figuring out was 64% of the people in the country want a stronger border and want more border security. When it comes to amnesty taking measures which are going to end up hurting our border security in the end, less than 10%, 8.8% of Americans are the people who are going to end up saying, maybe this is something we want, but the overwhelming majority, as we're talking about here, definitely don't want that. And I'm sure our listeners are very happy to hear about the fact where we're coming into this new Congress, getting some new blood in the House of Representatives, going to be Republican leadership, everything like that. We're going to be able to have some form of a pushback. But what I'm really worried about here, we're sitting here the first week of December. We have 3 weeks of a lame duck session. Do you think things are going to happen there which are going to be irreparable damage for the next 2 years once Republicans get back into power?
Well, there's certainly a push to do so, and it just goes to show how the priorities of lawmakers or certain lawmakers is so misaligned from what the American people want. The American people want border security. And what do we see instead? We hear a push of amnesty, and we hear a big tech green card giveaway that'll make a mess of the legal immigration system, and an effort to allow deported veterans who committed terrible crimes and were removed from our country to be allowed back in and essentially forgiven for their past criminal misconduct.
Yeah, just forget about it, right? They went back, came back over, they're a changed person, right?
Apparently, and it's just like nobody's calling for this except for special interests. And it's just time and time again, lawmakers and sometimes the executive branch are failing the American people. And this push here during the lame duck, if these provisions were so popular, they've had 2 years to do these things. If you're waiting until the last minute, it makes it seem like it's not that popular, because it's not. They've refused to have any of these bills go through the proper channels where it's transparent and open and it's debated, and you may have amendments to improve the bill or change the bill. This is just a push through, sneak it into a must-pass legislation and go from there. But if this Congress lame duck session passes any of these measures, it will completely spoil the well for the effort to secure the border with the bill that we're expecting the House of Representatives to usher through next year.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And now, you talk about the measures that we could take, making sure that things don't get passed in the lame duck. Something that we recently put out, it was fair in conjunction with the America First Policy Institute. Also, a few other groups, the Heritage Foundation, Texas Public Policy Foundation, groups like that all sent a letter to Congress. I'm sure you had a hand in that. Would you like to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a follow-up letter to a letter that we sent out in the springtime. I think it was around May, kind of getting ahead of what next year was going to look like. And it's just been so refreshing to have a coalition of folks who are clear-minded that securing the border is obligation and expectation and goal number one. And the first letter said, here's what we're expecting you to do. And then the more recent letter said, okay, now you have your new majority in the new Congress. Don't screw it up by passing non-border related issues in the lame duck. This is not the time to do anything other than basically keep the lights on. Keep the lights on and let the new Congress that the American people voted for take over, and especially in the House of Representatives, let those lawmakers actually advocate on behalf of the will of the people.
Yeah. Do you feel that they're going to be confident and listen to, the entire coalition and kind of go along with this? Or, just yesterday, it was Senator or a couple days ago, it was Senator Tillis and Senator Sinema ended up coming up with some sort of an agreement in the Senate where they said, yeah, we're going to let the Dreamers in, I think, something along those lines. That agreement, is this something that we think is going to be more common coming up in the next 3 weeks? Or do we think that they're going to take a little more, people are going to listen to your letter and actually read between the lines, figure out this is something we don't need to do?
Well, I mean, I think it all boils down to numbers. You're always going to have a subset of lawmakers of both political parties that don't really care what the American people want. They care what their donors want. And that's what you see in that initiative that's being called a deal. It's no deal. It's two amnesty supporters agreeing with each other. That's not a deal. And talk of a dreamer amnesty, which they always frame it as, it's for young people. They're all adults. It's a work permit program that they're trying to legalize. But just the framing of it, they frame it as it's for young people to make it seem sympathetic to the American people. But what they're really doing is they are encouraging the cartels to facilitate the next round of children being trafficked to the border. Because they'll say, look, these guys are about to get their amnesty. So we're going to traffic you to the border, and you're not going to get this one, but you're going to get the next one. And there's a direct responsibility that these guys have for all the heinous activity that occurs during that journey north. And it started with, DACA in 2012. UACs were not really a problem. Of course, there were some before 2012, but you look at 2014, 2 years after DACA is unveiled, you have a UAC crisis, or at least what you thought it was a UAC crisis, and it just got worse and worse and worse. Trump administration, we tried to put in place a number of policies to discourage it. And then as we were making inroads, Biden administration comes in place and undoes all of that, and the numbers are skyrocketing again.
Yeah, and it's just like you say, it's just crisis after crisis, just ongoing. I mean, it's almost like it's not really registering with the people in Congress right now because there's no sort of push, no real want to get things done, except for when it comes to these mass amnesty measures. So, another mass amnesty that I wanted to kind of touch base with you about, something you've been tweeting about recently, has been what's going on with these Afghans coming in. We had the botched exit from Afghanistan a year or so ago, and ever since then, there were some people that came over. We've been trying to sort of figure out how to figure out this situation. What does that look like from your perspective?
Well, I mean, it's a disaster, and it just goes to show you that the Biden administration is doing so many things wrong that it's kind of hard to keep the public's attention on all of them. So the border is drawing most of that focus to the extent that anyone's actually willing to cover it. And in the meantime, you have the Biden administration paroling in large groups of unvetted, visa-less aliens. And when it comes to the Afghans, what happened there was an embarrassment on all fronts, strategic, policy front, you name it. They basically allowed whomever could get onto an airplane, get on board, and they flew out of the Kabul airport and said, we'll figure out who you are later. And instead
How is that legal?
Oh, it's not legal. It's absolutely not, but they just don't care. They suspended the laws, and instead of stopping at a safe third country called a lily pad, and they could have done all the vetting there, however long it took, they could have done that. Instead, they basically stopped long enough to fuel up, and then they came to the United States, dropped them off here, and then...
sorry to cut you off.
Yeah,
is
no
that
problem.
a way of sort of checking off the list that they did the leap pad sort of country when they fuel up there, or is it just completely bypassed?
I mean, it's bypassed. The vetting didn't occur. The way these types of things are supposed to occur is there are special visas available to our true allies, and that's the buzzword that you hear out of these people that are saying, "Oh, our Afghan allies, they need something." Well, there's something called the special immigrant visa for those who actually meaningfully helped in the war effort. What ended up on that plane was a bunch of working-age men, many of whom had no involvement in the United States effort in Afghanistan. And they were allowed into the country, given work permits, cut loose before we figured out who they are. Some have gone on to commit crimes. And then you had a blistering report from the Inspector General about all of the vetting failures. Yeah. And instead of using that as a light bulb moment that says, we really screwed up, we need accountability, we need to detain all of them until they're all properly vetted, and those who are ineligible, which is almost all of them, need to be returned, whether that's to Afghanistan or to a different country. Those options are available. Wow. And instead, the push is in the exact opposite direction. Oh, we need to give them a green card. So people who don't even qualify for the specific visas available to our true allies are now having their unlawful presidents being smuggled and laundered essentially into a push to give them a permanent status in the United States and a path to citizenship. Some of these folks, may have very negative views of the United States.
Yeah, of course. And it really, it's a shame to our true allies, as you say. They throw that word around almost like asylum seeker or something along those lines, and the way that this just gets thrown around and the way that the people are treated, and they come in, they get the amnesty, and they're able to cut everyone in line who's been waiting for years on end. And it's just an absolute atrocity the way that we're not able to let the people who tried to come try to do it legally, as opposed to someone who just hopped on a plane, get into our country and get in legally. I just think the entire thing is just bananas. And you brought up this report. I think you said it was an ICE report where they were talking about how when we brought the people over, we didn't have a proper way to vet them. Inside of that report, it said something along the lines of I think it was at least 10% of these people had the same exact birthday. So, they don't even have their names. They don't have their dates right. They don't have a lot of things right. So they're pretty much writing down on the paper whatever people tell them. That can't be an effective way to try to track people.
No, you're exactly right. It was an Inspector General report, and basically it was take the alien at their word for who they are. They gave you a name, you wrote it down. They gave you a birthday, you wrote it down. They claimed they didn't know when their birthday was. You said, okay, well, how old are you? Okay, so we'll say, okay, that's 1989, and then you just get January 1 as a birthday. So 80% of that population has a January 1 birthday, apparently. It is the most prolific day for people to give birth, apparently. And it just goes to show that it's not serious. And then because you're accepting their story and writing it down, you are solidifying it and officializing it, which then means it'll be incredibly difficult in the future, if you have an administration that's serious about screening and vetting, to ever be able to refute that information because it's being locked in as gospel.
Yeah. So it's not only going to be affecting us now, it's, in the future, should in some world it ends up being, Republicans in 3 chambers, or, even if Congress and just the presidency, all the branches of government decide to work together to actually handle this crisis, it's going to be that much harder in the future to try to figure it out because of what's going on right now.
Yeah, the Biden administration is intentionally putting in place obstacles, barriers, to use one of their buzzwords, to ever root out any sort of immigration fraud that is occurring right now.
Yeah, and it's just going to be fraud, and it's going to be fraud for years to come. Rob, could you give us some kind of hope as to what's going to be happening soon, something that's going to maybe do a change in the water, something that's going to be a positive outlook on the immigration?
Sure. Well, again, the cavalry is coming, right? That's what the House of Representatives is going to look like in the new Congress. And, there's been a commitment from what's looking like that new Republican leadership, to groups like AFPI and FAIR and Heritage and others that they're taking border security seriously. They laid out a little bit of a framework about what's going to be in that bill. And I truly believe that bill is going to be introduced. It's going to be the strongest, most effective border security bill ever introduced. And I think it's going to be a priority of the new Congress, and it's going to pass the House. And I think that's going to be a huge win to show that at least when given the opportunity, this majority takes that issue seriously, put the onus on the Senate, and then go from there, possibly even getting it, if the numbers ever materialized, to force the hand on President Biden to veto it. But getting that bill through the House, I think, will be a critical first step. And then oversight. There seems to be a real commitment to oversight. The Biden administration officials have coasted by for the last 2 years. They've barely appeared before Congress. They get cupcake questions. Secretary Mayorkas has been allowed to lie under oath that he has operational control of the border and that the border is secure. And seeing real accountability on that front, you may see some people who want to spend more time with their family or return to the private sector. Who knows what might happen on that front? I think that'll be helpful. And then the third thing is the appropriations process, controlling the purse strings. Congress has very powerful tools, and if you start depriving these political appointees of their jets and their travel budgets and all those little goodies that they like, you defund some of their terrible policies, then that can be an effective way to at least slow down the damage. So at some point it can be reversible.
Yeah, understood. Well, for the sake of us here sitting at the table and for the sake of the country, I hope you're right about a lot of that stuff there. So Rob, tell people, where could they find you? Where could they follow you, find your information, find your work?
Sure. So the America First Policy Institute, you can check out the website, americafirstpolicy.com. I am more recently now on Twitter, which is a new thing.
We get that blue check mark?
Definitely not. But, trying to get a handle on that. So I'm at the Rob Law.
Okay.
So you can find me there. Not too prolific yet, but trying to figure out all the hashtags and however the algorithms work to actually get people to see it and be engaged. Eagle Act has gotten me a lot of achievement. So
I gotcha. Hey, you guys heard him. Give him a follow.
I'm
Come
getting
on.
there, but yeah,
I love it.
Get a few more follows, and maybe that check mark can be achievable as a 2023 goal. We'll see.
Awesome. Hey, maybe we could call up Elon, have him give it to you. I love that. Okay, well, thank you all so much for tuning in to Understanding Immigration today. Of course, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, anywhere where you can find podcasts, anywhere you can find videos. Mostly you'll be able to find us at Fair Immigration. Feel free to follow our Facebook, Twitter, Gab, Getter, True Social, all of them. We appreciate you all listening to the show. Rob, thank you again so much for being on. And this has been Understanding Immigration. Thanks for joining us.